So here we are with the carburetor components out of the ultrasonic cleaner, and we're now ready to assemble the carb. Checked over all of the components, and I've checked to make sure everything is still functioning correctly and there's no more crud, there's no crud left in it from the cleaning process. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on the float bowl and the jets. So I've got a new primary nozzle, so I'm going to fit that in to the lower of the ports. So this is the port that is closest to the engine side. If we're looking at the carburetor again, I've kept the choke bar on so we can see which end is the choke and which end is facing the air intake, and this end is facing the engine itself. So I then have the primary nozzle goes in here, so I will just put that in like this. Nice new primary nozzle, and I'll make sure that it comes through and is, yes, you can just see it poking through. Hopefully if I can just see the nipple of it poking through at the bottom. I will then put on the jet that goes onto that. Now this is the kit that I received to repair this carb did not come with the right sized jet, and this needs to be a 68. So I'm going to go a 68 jet that will fit into here. And I'll just put that in ever so gently. So that there is the secondary jet in place. I then have the slow jet is the middle tube here, and again remember this is the air side and this is the air filter side and this is the engine side, and so I have the rubber bung that goes over the slow jet. And if you remember, the slow jet is already pressed in place. It is a component that we have not removed, and so there's no need to do anything else apart from just putting that back in and making sure it's sealed up and it's nice and tight. The next set of components I have, I'll just put them here. I should have done this before really to show you on the other one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and lay them out in the orientation in which they go. So this is the nozzle itself, and this nozzle, again, as I showed you when we took it apart, has got a recess in one end. I can put the Allen key in there, and it is blank at the other. So it is flat on one side and it's got a recess at the other. That recess has to face the inside of the carburetor. So when I put it in here, I need to make sure that that recess goes into the body of the carburetor. So I'll pop that in like that, and it'll take a little bit of jiggery pokery to get it to seat properly. He says, and then we put in the main jet holder. And this just screws in like that, and then you can see, hopefully you'll be able to see on the inside again here, if I open up the throttle, you'll be able to see on the inside of there where you can see the needle nozzle is protruding into the body of the carburetor. So that's in place. I've got the main jet holder, and I just need to just tighten that up just a little bit. And the only reason I do this is to make sure that when I change the main jet, that this component stays in place and the jet itself can be removed. And the jet here, I've got a new jet, and that is a, I don't know if you can read it there, but it is a 105, which is the right size of jet for this particular vehicle. So there we go, there are my jets all put together, and we're all happy. I'll put it back the way that, well, I'll leave it like that. So there are all the jets, all reinstalled and all ready to go. The next component to put in is the float needle, And again, this is a new float needle. As I say, if you've got one of these and you're wanting to reuse it, you need to be really careful to make sure that the rubber element there is in good condition, there are no nicks, and it is still flexible, and that the spring still works in it. And so if you can see the spring there, I want to make sure that spring works, and it does, so I'm happy. We then have to slip that into the float itself. The float goes this way with the buoyancy modules hanging down, and so does the valve itself. And we pop that in there like that, putting the valve in first and then sliding the float in between these two supports. We then have a pin that we put in here. Says, and it just slides in and stays in position. Not particularly difficult. Now what we need to do is we need to measure the float height, and so what we do is we hold the carb at a 45-degree angle. We don't want it like this, and we don't want it in this orientation. Normally the carburetor will be sitting in this orientation when it's being running, probably slightly at an angle, and you can see the floats hanging down. We want to make sure we know how far up that float goes before it cuts off the feed of fluid into the bowl. So what we do is we tilt the carburetor over at this angle, we flick it a few times, and we measure the distance from this surface here to the top of there. As I've said in one of my other videos, the height of that float is specified in the of the operator's manual, and in this case it's 0.6 of an inch, just over half an inch, and there's quite a wide tolerance on it. We've measured it here and it is within tolerance. So that is everything in the float chamber complete. The next stage is to assemble the float bowl itself, and this is the float bowl from the number 2 carburetor, and I know it's from the number 2 carburetor because it has the diaphragm, the accelerator pump on the side of it. So I'm going to assemble the accelerator pump first. I've got a nice new O-ring in the center of here, and I've checked the port is clear. Blown through it one more time just to make sure, and I've checked that the other ports are also clear by putting some carb clean in here and here, and blowing it through with some compressed air just to make sure that the ports are free. We slide the plunger through the seal, and we obviously need to make sure that the Mickey Mouse ears line up like so. I've got a rubber boot that fits on there. I will put that on after to make sure it doesn't fall off or fall into here, so I will keep this out. If you do want to put that on, you just need to be careful, because sometimes I have seen this where the boot has fallen off and gone into the bowl and people haven't noticed. So I always like to leave that on until leave it off until such time as I'm absolutely ready to put this thing together. I have a new bleed screw. Well, it's not a new bleed screw, it's the existing bleed screw, but it's got a new O-ring on it, and I've cleaned up the tip of the bleed screw to make sure that it will make a good seat when it's screwed fully into that port there. I'm going to make sure that the drain overflow line is free and clear again, and I will blow into it, and as you can hear, it works fine. So I will put the screw in like this, and it just needs to go in just very lightly to seat there like that. I should still be able to get communication through this port. As you hear, it sounds slightly different. It's because it's not blowing into the bowl. So that's the bowl ready to be assembled. I have a nice shiny new O-ring to put in, and again, don't put any gunk in it, just put the O-ring in, that's all you need, and fit it in like that, and that's it. Perfect, I'm ready to go. I will now get ready to offer this up to the body of the carb. And I can see here that everything is still fully functional, so now I'm ready to put the rubber boot onto the accelerator piston. But first, before I do that, I obviously have to put the onto the bottom here. Now what I've done as well is I have cleaned up these screws a little bit to make sure they go in, so I know that they will go in relatively straightforward, nice and simple. Put them in just a couple of threads. Don't tighten them up just yet until they're all in. Yeah, it's just nipped up ever so slightly. I'm just going to check that the accelerator pump will still function, so I'll just press down that on a couple of times, and yeah, I can actually see, you actually see the bubbles coming out through the inside of the, well, you did used to be able to see the bubbles, but you'll feel some air coming through that port as the accelerator, you can hear it working there. So that's working fine, so I'm happy with that. So I can tighten these up. You don't want to tighten them too much. I just want to make sure everything functioned before I tightened it up. And I'll just check it one more time. You can hear it, hopefully. Perfect. Put my float bowl seal in place like this. Try not to. It'd be a lot easier if I just recorded lots of these and only showed you the good ones, but then you wouldn't really understand some of the issues of getting these in place. There we go. And I'll offer that up like so. And in she goes. Perfect. So you can see here how the boot has come through the boot there, and that's just to protect the piston. What I've done as well is I've decided, instead of having the normal Allen screws, I have replaced them with some stainless steel Allen keys. And the reason Allen bolts, and the reason I've done this is because these are easier to undo when you're underneath the motorcycle. They are less likely to roll the heads over, and they are shiny and nice and look a lot better. And I've decided to put them on here, but I'm not decided to do it completely through all of the through all the bolts. I've just decided to do it through some of them because not all of the screws will need to be replaced, but you can do that if that's what you want to do. So there we go. I'll just nip that up like that. So there we go. That is the float bowl in place. It's all done and dusted. I will then go and tighten those properly a little bit later. The next stage is to rebuild the pilot screw. If you remember, we took the pilot screw out. Now again, it's not something that is recommended by Honda if you can avoid it, because it is a factory set device, but I needed to make sure that the ports were all clear and clean, and I just wanted to make sure the carburetor was in good condition. You don't have to do it, but I chose to. So the pilot jet goes in here, sorry, the pilot screw goes in here. I'm just going to check that this port still has communication with the main body, and yes it does. That's a good sign. And now I'm ready to assemble this. We have the pilot screw itself, and you can see there it has a very sharp point to the end of it, high tolerance needle. We then have a spring that goes over the top of it, a washer, excuse me, and then an O-ring. Now a lot of people, when they put these things in, they will put them in when the carburetor is in this position or in this position, and what happens is the O-ring will flop over like that, and you won't get the pilot's screw to seat properly. So you need to make sure it's all lined up correctly, like so, and then you need to put it in this orientation. That way you know it's going to go in properly. This is a brand new pilot screw, so I don't need to really worry too much about the number of turns that I used to put it in. If you take the old pilot screw out, you should put it back in with the exact same number of turns as you used to take it out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it straight in as far as it'll go. You can just see it protruding into the body of the carburetor there, I think. I don't know if I can get the light to show it to you properly there. But you can just see the tip of it there. So I've screwed it in as far as it'll go. I haven't done it tightly because you'll just damage the end of the screw, the needle. And then I back it out 2 full turns. Half, 1, 1.5, 2. And I'll leave it there for just now until such time as I am ready to properly set the carburetor and balance it. And that's for another video. So there we are so far. The next item I'm going to put on is the air cutoff valve, and this is a diaphragm. I've looked at the diaphragm, I've checked that the rubber is okay, it's not perished, there are no holes in it. It will allow a pressure to act behind it, and I've checked the condition of the tip of the nozzle there. You can just see that that seals into this surface in here. So we just need to make sure that both of those are in good condition. We then have a seal. It looks like an O-ring, but it's not really an O-ring. It's actually just a cylindrical piece of rubber. And it's important that if you are going to replace it with an O-ring, that it is of the correct thickness. But you can see the thickness of it there. And that sits in this groove, in this recess here. And this allows air to pass from the body through this plate and into the back of the diaphragm. So again, I'm going to check on this plate that there is communication through that hole and into the body. And you can hear that there is, you can blow through that port and get air into the back. So I'm happy that that's working. I'll now put that O-ring into the seat. I will then put the diaphragm onto its seat as well, like that. I'll then place the, make sure that's nice and flat. I'll then place the plate over there like that, and then I will make sure that before I put the screws in, I don't forget this baby. This is the spring, and the reason I put this in last is because some people put it in underneath the diaphragm, which is completely incorrect. I always want to make sure that everything is in place before I put the spring on. He says I'm going to put that in like that. And there we go. Very simple, very straightforward. That is the air. I keep having to refer to it as the air cutoff valve because that is how it is described in the manual. But to me it's just a diaphragm. Screws in there. So it just goes to show that sometimes you pick up the wrong screws. Because these are too long. Fortunately, I have the right ones here. These I believe are M4s and are 10mm long, and those are M4s that are 18mm long. Don't need to bore you with the technicalities, but that's it. So there we go. So it's the bottom end of the carb fixed. I've got the accelerator pump in place, the air cutoff diaphragm in place, all the jets in place, and the floats in place. So the next part is to do the upper components. So they're all here. So I'll bring them forward so you can see them. Now, the kit that the original needle is this one here, and behind the needle were 2 washers, and the 2 washers were there to allow spacing between the circlip that clipped into those grooves and the hold down nut. Now, the repair kit that I've got has got 2 different types of needles. And you can see this one here has got a variety of different tapers on it, and I've got different needles that have come in the kit. So the needle that comes in the kit with the grooves, you can see, is much longer than the one that's come out of the carb. So it's not only just longer, it's of a different shape. And there's another one that came in the kit which looks like this. Now I much prefer a progressive needle, and I'm going to use this one here, and I'm going to discard this one. This one here does not have the ability to adjust the circlip position because there are no grooves in it, and so I don't need the washers. I'll take those out the way, but you can see that if I had the washers behind that circlip, it would be the same length as this needle. So that's what I'm going to use. Put that out of the way while I just show you the body of the carb. In here you have a number of air jets. You have primary and secondary main air jets and air feeds, and they are pressed in place. You don't need to mess with those. You shouldn't have taken them out, and hopefully you haven't taken them out. Just make sure they're clear and clean, and I've blown through them with compressed air. I can't actually get my mouth over that to blow through it so you can hear it, but trust me, they are clear. I've then got this fancy piece of plastic which is called an air jet cover because, surprise surprise, it covers the air jets. It's also got a little lug on it that secures it onto the body, but this lug also acts as a guide for this piston. So I'll just put that in place just for completeness. It doesn't need to be tight, but it just needs to be secure because you don't want it rattling about, and if it's going to be an air jet cover, you want it to actually cover things. So that's it in place. The next thing I do is I assemble this device here. The first thing you put in is the needle. It's still a little bit wet there. Come out of the washer. I then put in the hold down screw, and I tighten that up. I don't tighten it up too much. I just want to make sure it holds the needle in place. I don't want the needle rising and falling of its own accord. I want it to rise and fall along with this. So it's important that this holds it in place. So I don't want the needle to be able to wobble up and down, but I do want it to be able to find its own center. If you tighten it down too much and the needle is rigid compared to this, it can wear the side of the nozzle. So it's important that you put it in place like that. We then have the spring on top of that, and then I'll put that top on as well, but I've also got a little plug that seals in like this. And that plug basically helps with the CV working and the vacuum that is created in the back of here that is driven by some jets on the inside of that. I'll just put that on its side for the moment. This is the upper seal, and when you put this in, you'll see there's a groove. I don't know if you can quite see that at the moment, but you can see there's a groove on the top of it, and the groove goes upwards. Put that on first. Put in your slide, making sure you set the groove, this groove here in the slide, in line with that plastic tang. And as you put it into the body of the carburetor, I should turn around the other way, you need to make sure that the needle goes into the nozzle at the bottom. And there we are. So that slides in quite nicely. You can see it's quite free and easy to move. I'll then put the cap over the top of it, and then that slides down nice and easily. And then you should be able to, as I move it up and down, you should be able to hear that whistling noise as the venting system works within the carb. And again, I've got some new Allen bolts that will hold the cap down in place. Hopefully I've got the right ones this time. Indeed I do. And really there we are. I'll tighten those up in a minute, but that is the number 2 carb, fully assembled and ready to accept fluid and be built up with the bank of other carburetors. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will be another video for another day.